So the Gaza war have totally exposed the economic weakness of the American. It shows us how weak the American manufacturing industry may be. The Ukraine and Russian war may have depleted a significant amount of American weapons, making them struggling to keep both Ukraine and Israel supplied with ample amount of weapon, and that's why many are saying that the American is much more focused on sending weapons and equipment to Israel and much less for Ukraine, as they simply may not be able to do so. Moreover, these weapons and equipment are not free. They require the American government to use cold hard cash or to issue more debts to buy them and to also replenish their stockpile of weapons and equipment. We are now talking about the possibility of the Americans spending billions of dollars in buying weapons and supplying her closer ally in the Middle East, Israel, adding pressure to the American deficit spending and debt crisis. And this is not 1973. This is something we need to understand. The American national debt is not even $500 billion in 1973. During the last oil crisis, where the Arab nation placed oil embargo on nations that support Israel in the 1973 war. Today, the American debt is nearly $34 trillion. Moreover, right now, interest rate is being kept at the higher side to help her to battle inflation. So the question over here is, if the current crisis in the Middle East worsen, can the American afford to spend more money to fight a war or to help her closer ally Israel to fight against more potential rival in the Middle East? American may kind of look like an empire that depends on massive amount of debts to keep her running. And budget deficit of more than $1 trillion per year is quite common this day. They won't even blink an eye when that happens. This is kind of ridiculous, right? If you look at the previous global superpower, the Great British, many experts argue that due to overspending fighting during World War II, the British lose her empire and she's no longer a global superpower after World War II. Overspending and massive debt destroy empire. This is something I think we all understand. And research have been done on when the US debt will reach unsustainable level. According to research, under current policy of overspending, the United States may only have around 20 years or less for corrective action, after which no amount of future tax increase or spending cut may be able to save the US government from defaulting on her debts in the future. Now, this research may be done on the condition that the American is not involved in any major war or under the condition that no major pandemic like the COVID-19 break out again. All these are crises that require the American government to spend heavily if they happens in the future. Remember the recent COVID-19 pandemic. The US government increased her debts by a few $1 trillion just to help her to combat the COVID-19 pandemic. And over the Russian side, we are seeing how they managed to cope and survive after being hit with more than 3,000 sanctions from the West. Technically, if you look at it in another angle, the West is fighting an economic war with Russia, imposing sanctions and actually trying to ask nations worldwide to kind of boycott Russian oil, which we know is not possible. The world simply can't live without Russian oil. And in a way, the Russian economy is now very well oiled to fight a prolonged war in Ukraine. And many experts have said this is Putin kind of mindset because he believes the Russian is able to outlast the West, because the West economic is quite weak now and they're heavily in debts, interest rate is high, inflation is high. The Russian system is there to help them to kind of fight a prolonged war with Ukraine to actually outlast the West and drag down the West in this economic war. Moreover, with the OPEC nation on quite good terms with the Russian in terms of oil production cut agreement to actually shore up the price of oil and prevent oil price from, collapsing too low, Russian oil revenue and income are quite stable and safe. Look, we need to understand that this is a different war from the 1980s, where many experts point out that in the 1980s, the Saudi Arabia may have contributed to the collapse of the Soviet Union by flooding the market with massive amount of oil back then and collapse the global oil price market. And that kind of may contribute to the Soviet Union losing a big portion of oil revenue and kind of lead to her economic collapse because the Soviet financial was greatly weakened by her prolonged war in the Afghanistan. The oil price collapse kind of maybe led to the final collapse out of the Soviet Union in 1991. But history is not going to repeat this time round, despite multiple attempts by the American to actually ask Saudi to pump more oil to help the American to cool down her inflation and maybe to weaken Russian oil revenue and economic. Biden even made a personal trip earlier on this year to do so. And OPEC and Saudi do not really buy what the Americans saying. They kind of do the opposite. They cut oil production instead with Russian. So this shows us how much influence the Americans have lost in the Middle East. And the ongoing Gaza war is not helping the situation at all. Many Arab nations may be angry that the American is giving such a kind of strong support to Israel, and even sent 2 aircraft carrier battle group and 1 nuclear submarine to the Middle East region. Although the Americans say this Navy force are sent to prevent the crisis from escalating, but many Arabs may feel that it is kind of show of force to prevent this Arab nation from attacking Israel. So there's a saying out there that do not bite the hand that feed you. I do not know if that apply to the American or not. You see, the petrodollar system where the Arab nation sell their oil exclusively in the US dollar enable the American to maintain her US dollar as the world reserve currency, allowing her to technically be able to issue debts easily and create an artificial demand for the US dollar. So this is a system that greatly benefits the American financial power and her empire. The deal between the Arabs and the American was agreed in the 1970s, and in return the Americans sell weapons to the Arabs and provide them with security and protection. But the Gaza war may have shown the Arab nation that their security may not be that safe and stable if it's been left in the American hand alone. I mean, if in the event, if they kind of enter a fight with Israel, they may be abandoned by the American. And since the war is now a totally different place as the 1970s and 1980s, with China power now rising, and with China ties and trade grow with the Arabs, the Arabs may abandon the petrodollar system in the near future and may start selling oil in China yuan. I mean, we can't deny that China is also kind of a superpower today. And I have mentioned many times in my previous video that the American power may be significantly hurt if the US dollar is no longer the global reserve currency. If the petrodollar system collapses, she will struggle to kind of sell her debts, and interest rate may actually soar out of control because she may need to increase them to attract buyers. And nations worldwide will be less motivated to hold US dollar asset once the dollar is no longer the reserve currency and the dollar usage in the global trade is significantly reduced. Her US dollar sanction will also be less powerful and less effective. You see, recently China have bought 1 million barrels of oil that is settled in digital yuan, and that totally bypassed the US dollar. So China focused on her digital yuan development, and her Belt and Road project may lead to more global trade to be settled in the China yuan. In the long run, the US dollar usage in the international trade may keep dropping. And we are seeing how Russia and China is playing the economic long game with the West and the American. Russia is earning more oil revenue as oil price is on the higher side due to the Gaza war and Ukraine war. And China may kind of benefit from these two events also, because the Arabs may now prefer a multi-superpower in the Middle East where they may welcome both China, American and Russian in the region, and that kind of give the American less bargaining power and influence over the Middle East in the long run. I mean, we should not be surprised if China start to have military base in the Middle East. Do not forget that there are rumors saying that China is in talk of some major arm deal with Saudi Arabia and Egypt. And Saudi do have a history of buying missile system and weapon from China since 1980s. It may not be that hard for the Arab nation to diversify their weapon supply, as they may want to reduce their dependency on the American for their security. If the Arabs' dependency on the American for their security weaken in the days to come, then it may kind of make less sense for them to continue supporting the US dollar petrodollar system, because it's all part of the deal, and China yuan may enter the picture and the Arabs may start selling oil in both US dollar and China yen in the near future. All this may happen. And anyway, this is nothing new. No reserve currency lasts forever in human history. Reserve currency come and go, and that applies to empire too. And we know that the weaponized of the US dollar in sanctioning other nations and the massive debt accumulation by the American may have speed up the collapse of the dollar, kind of killing off the chicken that laid the golden egg for the American. So what do you think about the economic war between the West and Russian China? Who do you think will win the economic war? Can the US dollar be the reserve currency forever? What's your view? Please comment below and share with me. Please subscribe, share and like. Thanks for watching.